Welcome back, dear listener, to another quiet corner of the past, a softer kind of history, the kind that doesn't shout. It lingers. Tonight, we're going back not to castles or crusades, not to revolutions or plague carts, but further, to a time long before any of that was possible. Back when humanity was complicated. Not in the modern. We invented bureaucracy and forgot how to talk to each other sort of way. But biologically complicated, because once upon a time, if you can even call the Pleistocene, once upon a time, you were not alone. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. I mean literally, there were others. Other kinds of humans. You didn't stand on the earth like some lonely chosen species basking in evolutionary spotlight. You were one of several. Sharing rivers, forests, caves, sharing the sky, the stars. Sharing what it meant to be human, though no one had quite put that into words yet. And now they're all gone. Neanderthals, Denisovans, little fire makers on islands. The whole strange, beautiful, extinct ensemble vanished like fog before the sun, and all that's left is, well, us. Modern humans, nervous, noisy, slightly overconfident in our uniqueness. So tonight, we'll step into that silence. We'll wander through what we know and what we guess, through fossils and fragments and the eerie traces of other minds that once looked out, through eyes not so different from yours, not to solve anything, just to remember. Because sometimes being the last of your kind isn't a victory. It's mystery. So settle in. The fire's lit. The past is waiting. And for a while, let's remember the world as it was when we were not alone. You stand on the lip of a world that doesn't belong to you alone. Not yet. It's roughly 50 millennia before your time. No steel girders, no asphalt, no smartphones. Just wind and water, glaciers and jungle, and a chorus of creatures that once thought themselves rulers of the earth. And, if you're listening closely, you can hear faint echoes of human voices. Not one but many. Picture this. A vast pine forest where the air burns your lungs with cold, like inhaling tiny shards of ice. Here, in the gloom beneath dripping branches, live the Neanderthals. They are muscular as bison, built for survival in a frozen Europe. Their breath mists in the air while they sharpen flint tools beside mammoth bones. They aren't exactly your cousins, more like the burly uncle you're a little afraid of, but secretly admire when he invents a new way to crack bones for marrow. Swing your gaze eastward, past treeless plains and ragged hills, to the mountains where the air grows thin. There, in the high-altitude crevices of Central Asia, dwell the Denisovans, so named for a Siberian cave that yielded little more than a pinky bone and a couple of teeth. Yet those fragments carry secrets, DNA, that survives in you if your ancestors ventured into Asia. They're the quiet scholars of ice and rock, their stories whispered between genes rather than carved on stone walls. Bend south into the verdant islands of what will one day be Indonesia. On Flores, you might meet Homo floresiensis, standing barely as tall as your knee. The hobbits, if your descendants ever choose to mock them with literary references. But consider, in that dense jungle, with giant rats and Komodo dragons. For neighbors, small size might have been a blessing, not a punchline. Drift north to Luzon in the Philippines, where Homo luzonensis once scratched out a life in limestone caves. Their bones are rare as pearls, but their existence shatters the comforting myth of a single human family. They remind you that evolution is messy, unpredictable, like a party where half the guests decide to leave early, but not before spilling wine on the carpet. And if you keep going, through haze and heat, you'll stumble upon the long shadows of Homo erectus, the original travelers. They'd set out of Africa more than 1 million years ago, pioneering across Asia with the stubborn resolve of someone who refuses to stop until they've seen the world dot so many faces, so many hands that knew fire, so many eyes that watched stars, wondered why they burned. Some of these humans wielded spears, some fashioned beads, some painted ochre on cave walls. Others left no mark, but the shallow groove of a footprint. Imagine the bewilderment in those first encounters. You, a lean Homo sapiens with expressive eyebrows and a penchant for gossip, stepping into turf claimed by a Neanderthal hunting party. No translator, no protocol, just mutual surprise. They see you, the tall, gracile newcomer, whose tools click with unfamiliar precision. You see them stocky silhouettes in furs, carrying the silent weight of generations. This was no solitary march of progress. It was crowd control on a geological scale. A crowded neighborhood where every tenant had the same rent. Survival. Asterisk here. In this primeval tapestry, life unfolds in rhythms both familiar and alien. You might awaken to a damp dawn, mist weaving through trembling pines. The scent of wet earth and decaying leaves drifts in. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a Neanderthal forager cracks open a nut with a river stone, an act both simple and profound. Their world, like yours, begins with hunger and hope, not 10 miles away. A Denisovan family, if you can lend them such a modern word, sifts through pebbles at daylight's first light, searching for flint suitable to craft a blade. They work in near silence, as if sound itself might disturb the mountain's vast expanse. You can imagine their thoughts, not in words perhaps, but in patterns of breath and gesture. By mid-morning, your Homo sapiens kin gather by a river bend, sharing fish wrapped in leaves. Conversation flows about the hunt, the weather, the shape of a new stone tool that might just make cutting animal hide dangerously easy. Because yes, someone had to figure out that slicing through sinew is far more efficient than knowing it. A few of your party drift toward unfamiliar smoke columns on the horizon. Neanderthal hearths, meticulously arranged under rocky overhangs. There is curiosity, that uniquely sapiens trait that occasionally leads to brilliance and sometimes to trouble. Soon, cautious glances are exchanged, theirs narrowed with suspicion, yours wide with possibility. Wealth in this world is measured, not in gold, but in kin and fire. The more connections you hold, the better your chances. The Neanderthal group across the clearing might offer refuge in winter. The Denisovans, with their high-altitude expertise, might teach you to breathe thin, air without your lungs feeling like charred paper. If you're bold or foolish, you might even attempt to share a meal, risking scorn or friendship in equal measure. But imagine this. You offer half your catch. They hesitate, then accept. A moment of exchange unfolds steel-gray fish skin, trading hands for a pointed flint blade. No treaty signed on papyrus. Just two species acknowledging the fragile currency of trust. Yet for every handshake, or the prehistoric equivalent, there is also tension. Spears are sharpened, eyes are measured, grip on the half tightens. Because resources are finite. A bitter winter could force a band to trespass on another's territory. Ice sheets squeeze forests into narrow corridors. Hunger makes strangers of neighbors. And hunger, dear listener, is a blunt instrument. It presses you to choices you might not otherwise make. It whispers that cooperation is a luxury and violence a necessity. In some places, scars on Neanderthal bones hint at violent ends, punctures from sharp points, blows that suggest retaliation, perhaps even encounters so fierce that neither side bothered to bury their dead. But don't mistake these sparks for wholesale warfare. There were no grand battles with thousands marched against thousands. No banners unfurled in the frigid sky. Just small group dynamics, pitched moments of danger, caught between cooperation and conflict. Like neighbors arguing over a fence, except the fence is invisible, and the neighbors carry spears. Daily life, however, possessed its gentle rhythms too. You would see all humans Homo sapiens and the rest minding fires at twilight, sharing stories in flickering light. Perhaps they hummed tunes, fingers tracing patterns on rock walls. Maybe they pressed pigments into handprints, their own signatures that time would almost erase. A child born of mixing part Neanderthal, part sapiens would enter a world without labels, guided by fierce caregivers who saw no need for taxonomy. Such children carried in their blood the promise of two worlds, not unlike modern listeners carrying the DNA of vanished kin in every cell. They grew into bodies that taught us more about unity than division. Across continents, the same scene might repeat. Fires crackling, communities bound by shared need and shared wonder. Ice Age stars wheeling overhead. No watchful satellites, just the open sky, audaciously oblivious to human taxonomy's dot, and in these moments, all humans, no matter the shape of skull or breadth of shoulder, were bound by a single silent truth. Life is tenuous. Existence is a shallow breath. Every dawn is a gift. Yet, over countless seasons, something shifted. You might pinpoint a downturn in cave paintings or a decline in hearth sites. Climate ebbs and flows, squeezing habitats. Competition tightens. The bands that spread gossip become the bands that claim more land. Language, once a fragile thread, becomes a weapon of cohesion, allowing Homo sapiens to weave vast alliances that others simply could not keep pace with. In the hush before contact, the world holds its breath. No grand announcements, no trumpets echoing across the plains, just two shadows drifting closer in the half-light of dawn. You, a Homo sapiens wanderer, follow the curve of a riverbank, keen to snare fish at first light. Your companions joke softly, because here, voices carry like stones, skipping on still water, about the ease of this day's catch. Behind you, laughter ripples through your small band. Ahead, steam rises. From a Neanderthal hearth, like smoke signaling occupied. There is a moment where the river splits. One channel leads to the familiar firelight of your people. The other to strange silhouettes carving bone. Your pulse quickens. Not from the chill in the air, but from a surge of that most sapiens of. Feelings dash curiosity. They see you too. A flicker of eyes in the gloom. A hand tightens on a spear, yet neither side retreats. Neither side advances. Instead, both sides simply watch. What passes between two groups who recognize themselves and recognize something not themselves. No treaty, no handshake, just a pregnant silence. You recall this moment long after, as a dream half remembered, the way their brows furrowed when you raised a fish in tentative offering, the way your guide's jaw tightened when a bone tool clacked against stone, the way the river gurgled, as if narrating an ancient tale of first encounters. Eventually, hunger and hope override fear. You step forward, holding out a fish wrapped in large leaves. You've practiced this gesture in your mind, though there's nothing rehearsed about it. The nearest Neanderthal, the one whose almond-shaped eyes gleam in morning. Light reaches out with massive fingers and takes the gift. A pause so pregnant you could carve it into a tool of your own. Then slowly, he tosses you a flint blade, its edge promising to slice hide as easily as your own. This fragile exchange becomes a refrain. Fish for flint, berry for bone needle, ember for water pouch. With each small trade, walls thin. You note how their hands, broad and warm, cradle a fish much like yours would. You see in their eyes a cautious spark of wonder, perhaps even respect. But for every moment of warmth, there is tension. Every exchanged smile is shadowed by the knowledge that tomorrow's weather may turn, driving elk herds south and forcing your competitors to follow. When food runs scarce, gratitude can curdle to suspicion. Flint becomes a threat. Fish bones become ammunition. On Occasions darker than the long winter nights, you find evidence of violence. A hastily buried corpse, a spear tip embedded too deep. It tells you that even this tentative bridge between species sometimes snapped under pressure. Yet more often than not, you remember how firelight softened faces on both sides, wrinkles, and scars flickering, stories half told, laughter as tentative as a fledgling songbird dot in these meetings. You learn not only what divides you, but what binds you. The need for warmth, the ache of loneliness, the hunger that drives innovation, and the longing for fellowship that tames it. You watch them fashion tools from stone, marvel at the precision of their flake scars. They watch you speak in rapid bursts, accentuating words with hands, weaving invisible threads of meaning in the air. No history books survive to detail these days, no sagas carved on bone to immortalize them. Only the ghosts in our genomes remain to whisper that these meetings happened, some warm, some fierce, all real. And as the sun dips low on that unnamed day, you and they return to separate fires, your laughter mingling with the crackle of your hearth, their silhouettes bending over obsidian blades. But you carry the memory of each other into your dreams, because the first meeting was not a conquest. It was an experiment, an unspoken question. What happens when we meet someone so like us, yet not us? The answer ripples forward through millennia, down to the quiet strands of DNA in your cells. Asterisk by the flicker of dawn's second light. Those early exchanges had given way to cautious rituals. You noticed the Neanderthals had their own protocol. No gawking at new arrivals, no sudden movements. A nod was as good as a handshake. A silent rise of brows meant speak on, though, let's be honest, it wasn't poetry. More like grunting with flair. In turn, your band adopted a few of their habits. You learned to bury your dead with care tucking. Simple stone offerings beside them, so perhaps the ancestors won't nag you in dreams. You pick up a Denisovan knack for knotting sinew into resilient cords, handy for hauling heavy hides. They, meanwhile, seem oddly fascinated by your colorful pigments, earthy reds and yellows that stain your skin in artistic defiance of the cold. These rituals are fragile things. A spilled bowl of berries could be taken as insult, a misthrown spear later recounted across flickering flames as evidence of hostile intent. But you adapt. You learn that in this multi-human neighborhood, social grace is as essential as a sharp blade. History doesn't record your polite gestures, but your DNA holds the memory of their appreciation. Stories, too, move between camps. Perhaps you told a tale of the Great Flood, an imagined torrent pulling forests into the sea. They responded with their own fable, an abundant mammoth herd that vanished overnight under a sky bright with fire. Were these stories born of fact, of fear, or of the same spark of imagination that later ignited Homo sapiens' first myths? You'll never know. Yet the impulse to share stories is itself a sign of deep kinship. Gradually, the boundaries between us and them soften. Not completely, you still wake to occasional spear-throwing drills, and you still watch them sharpening heavy scrapers with an edge of suspicion, but enough that, in some places, small mixed bands may have formed. You, a sapient trickster prone to chatter, might find yourself sitting between broad-shouldered Neanderthals, trading gossip as easily as you trade tools. Imagine the awkward family dinner. Pass the marrow. You say silence. Then a Neanderthal turns to you and grunts, "Marrow, go here," pointing. The modern version of subtitles. But for all the camaraderie, subtle power dynamics lurk beneath. Your linguistic agility lets you coordinate hunting parties that span dozens of individuals, far larger than the tightly knit Neanderthal bands. Rumor spreads quickly in your telephone game of a language, allowing distant groups of sapiens to share news of migrating herds or impending storms. The Neanderthal and Denisovan networks, by contrast, remain local. They know their valley. You know 3 valleys, and someone in Valley 3 just sketched a warning symbol on a rock face. Over time, this broader social web becomes an unspoken weapon. When food thins, your networks can reroute hunts or share hidden stores. Neanderthal. Groups, with fewer all-eyes beyond the next ridge, feel the pinch first. And when conflict flares, because it always does, the balance tips toward the species with the deepest trust networks, the most elaborate gossip chains, the knack for forging new allegiances at breakfast. Yet, even at the height of these pressures, outright genocidal campaigns remain rare. It's never the choreographed mass slaughter of Hollywood imagination. More often, it's attrition. One band fails to return, its members dwindling after a particularly brutal winter. Another retreats into the highlands, hemmed in by ice and stone. Another melds quietly into sapiens bands through marriage or adoption. A gentle erasure, rather than a battlefield crescendo. And through it all, your species carries on its defining obsession, talking about itself, painting its story on every available surface cave walls, bone fragments, scattered ochre stains. It's as if you can't help but announce your arrival, your presence. Maybe it's vanity, maybe it's desperation. But every pictograph, every echoing drumbeat, every whispered chant is a claim. We are here. If the Neanderthals or Denisovans felt the same urge, they left far less evidence. Their songs, their chants, if they had them, vanished with their voices. All that remains are their bones and the faint, genetic chorus woven into your cells. So when you consider those first meetings, those awkward dinners, those exchanges of fish and flint, remember this. They weren't merely social experiments. They were audition tapes for survival. Each nod, each shared ember, was a line in the script that determined who would last and who would be remembered only in fragments. By the time the sun dips below the pines, fires have cooled on both sides. You return to your camp, tired but enriched, with new tools, new pigments, and a deeper, more complicated understanding of what human means. And somewhere, out of sight, another band does the same, carrying tokens of your visit and the odds. Memory of your strange, talkative faces. Because the first true contact between Homo sapiens and their extinct cousins was not conquest. It was conversation, barter, cultural cross-pollination, and subtle competition, all bound together by the fragile thread of shared humanity. So what made us different? Imagine waking in a cavern so vast it echoes each breath you take, the damp stone welcoming your voice as it unfurls into the darkness. Nearby, a Neanderthal hunting party crouches in silence, communicating in clipped grunts and gestures, while you and your kin gather at twilight to hum a low, rhythmic drone that swells into a lullaby for tomorrow's hunt. That humming is more than music. It is evidence of a shared language rich in tone and nuance, capable of turning a simple run into running, expressing motion, not just through space, but through time. You've crafted pronouns to include or exclude, we versus they, so you can gossip about that awkward dinner with the flake throwers in the East, whereas Neanderthals may have only managed something like, them eat fish, good? In practice, this ability to string words together lets you plan hunts of astonishing complexity. A single sentence, at first light tomorrow, we flank the giant elk herd near the limestone bluff, can send dozens of people in two directions, coordinating a pincer movement that would leave even the wariest elk bewildered. Your Neanderthal neighbors, limited to local signals, might muster a handful of hunters for a task that demands a dozen. And let's be honest, Homo sapiens have always loved to talk, perhaps excessively. From debating the best way to roast, a mammoth shoulder to speculating on the glow of distant meteors, or trading playful insults about whose hide cloak is the ugliest. That chatter creates bonds. Bonds that, as it turns out, save your life when winter sets in. Then there is art. in what will one day be called the Shalvit Cave. Your ancestors painted horses with veins of shadow and light, so vivid they appear ready to leap from the wall into your very lap. 200 feet away, a half-obliterated handprint peers back yours, perhaps, or that of a fellow dreamer. Contrast this with a Neanderthal site in Gibraltar, where a few red ochre studs mark a time no one quite understood. Your people craved an audience. You sculpted Venus figurines with exaggerated curves, fertility icons, or prehistoric jokes will never decode in painted dreamscapes so elaborate they might have served as calendars, star charts, or the world's earliest graffiti. By inscribing spaces, you created a shared memory palace, binding communities to places and events through collective imagination. Rituals followed naturally. Picture a dimly lit encampment, the air thick with roasting fat and damp fur. Around, a central pit, embers pulse like red eyes, and someone dips fingertips in ochre to bless each brow. This ritual marks who belongs, tells outsiders to tread gently, comforts the fearful, and orders the chaotic. In the flickering firelight, hunters become something more than flesh and bone. They become a tribe. Your Homo sapiens rituals were memorably theatrical, built to impress and endure. They fostered cohesion and inspired loyalty in ways simpler ceremonies could not. Beneath a sky so bright, its stars cast shadows. Someone may have raised a voice in invocation to the moon. The chant rises and falls, each syllable a bond among listeners, a shared hope that this song will coax favors from unseen powers. Belief in invisible forces, animal spirits, ancestral watchers, sky gods became social glue. They justified cooperation between distant groups. We share blood with the mountain people because we both honor the eagle spirit. Suddenly, two bands separated by miles felt bound by cosmic purpose. Taboo governed behavior. Do not slay your first deer of the season before the moon hymn, and ensured resources were managed responsibly. Such cohesion proved invaluable when the wolves howled louder and the mammoths grew scarce. In contrast, Neanderthals and Denisovans, brilliant as they were, left far fewer traces of complex cosmology. Their burials show reverence, but lack the elaborate mythologies that animated your rituals. Their social networks stayed small tight, family units rather than the sprawling alliances your gossip and rituals wove across valleys. When drought struck or cold returned, your extended webs could reroute hunts, share stores, or absorb displaced bands. Your neighbors, tethered to local kin, confronted disasters alone. This unseen superpower language, art, ritual, and myth functioned as the stealth weapon of Homo sapiens. It allowed you to synchronize efforts, to imagine futures, and to create obligations that outlasted muscle and bone. While Neanderthals might have matched your strength, and Denisovans thrived in thin air, they did not spin the same intricate social tapestry. You survived not through brute force alone, but through a narrative infrastructure that bound strangers into allies, transforming hardship into collective myth, and weaving the raw material of survival into the enduring fabric of culture. And so, when the next winter howls at your camp, when the herds scatter beneath gray skies, it is your stories, your songs, and your rituals that rally you. You remind each other of the Great Bear constellation that guided your ancestors south. You share secret caches because the sky spirits will punish hoarders, and you extend hospitality to distant bands because their stories affirm your own. These invisible armaments, so easily dismissed as mere culture, become the quiet edge that outlasts glaciers and outcompetes cousins who erode like forgotten whispers. In the coming section, we will follow the slow disappearance of those other human species, all without the spectacle of pitched battles traced. Instead, through the gradual unraveling of social fabrics less intricate than your own. Imagine a world sculpted not by borders, but by ice and wind, by towering peaks and choking jungles, each landscape alive with its own rhythms and challenges. In the north, the Neanderthal steppes spread like a great gray sea under a sky so vast. It feels endless. Here, the wind carries the sharp tang of frost, and the earth is hard as iron. The Neanderthals, stocky as boulders themselves, moved through this frozen tableau with practiced ease. Their sinewy calves pumped beneath layered skins, their heavy feet leaving deep impressions in the snow that would last until spring's thaw. They hunted giant deer and bison with thrusting spears, their breath steaming in front of them as they pressed into the cold, following herds in a dance as old as memory. Far to the east, the world climbed into a mosaic of ridges and valleys where the air thinned like a whispered secret. The Denisovans had mastered these heights, living in a realm where even wolves sometimes struggled for breath. They fashioned blades of jade and quartz, gleaming green and white like hidden gems in the rock. Their camps clung to crags above rushing rivers, their fires small but enduring against bitter winds. Here, meal consisted of marmot and mountain goat, cooked slowly in clay vessels that cracked with heat. They wore layered furs, stitched with sinew threaded through tiny holes, each stitch a testament to patience and precision honed over generations. Beneath the equator, the islands of Flores and Luzon pulsed with life of a different sort. Flores hobbits tiptoed through dense undergrowth where sunlight dappled the green floor in shifting patterns. They stood no taller than a child, but their small stature was a survival strategy against predators and parasites alike. They fashioned tiny tools, microscopic arrowheads, and fishhooks from local stone, and their fires were modest, barely a flicker beneath the dense canopy. Their diet leaned heavily on freshwater fish and tubers tunneling beneath the soil, but they also scavenged giant rat carcasses with surprising bravado. On Luzon, another small species etched its life into limestone caves. Their hands, slender and delicate, left pale fingerprints on walls that still echo today. They cracked nuts and mollusks, using flaked tools shaped to pry flesh from shell. Rivers carved deep ravines in the landscape, and these people learned to navigate by stars reflected in quiet pools at night. Their mastery of watercraft remains an enigma. Did they cross straits in simple rafts or hope upon the currents? No one knows. What survives is their imprint, the silent ring of a shell necklace, a tangle of sinew cord, an echo of footsteps long since faded. And through it all, you Homo sapiens wandered the spaces between, never fully part of anyone. Landscape. You adapted with chameleon-like skill, crafting tailored skins to brave the cold, building temporary shelters of bone and hide, learning to fish in mountain streams, and to harvest shellfish on sun-bleached shores. You planted temporary gardens of wild grains, scattering seeds near your camps to ensure a steady supply. You were the generalists, the ecological diplomats, moving across climates with an ease that left other species blinking in dawning recognition. In the chill north, you watched the Neanderthals' techniques, how they hollowed antlers to create sturdy handles, how they thawed frozen meat with heated stones, how they used snow trenches as windbreaks. You borrowed those methods, adapted them to your own tribe, and passed them on across the miles. In the heights, you traded dried fish for jade blades, learning to breathe the thin air by mimicking the Denisovans' slow, rhythmic inhalations. In the jungles, you adopted the hobbits' stealthy foraging, crouching beneath ferns to snatch edible roots and avoid the giant monitor lizard that drifted nearby. But this sharing was never equal. Your bands grew larger, your social circles more numerous. You carried news of new berry patches across valleys, warned distant kin of migrating herds, convened grand feasts where dozens, sometimes hundreds, gathered. These gatherings were spectacles of abundance. Smoked meats hung from wooden frames, vibrant pigments stained faces in elaborate patterns, Drumming echoed until it seemed the very earth pulsed with life. The smaller species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, hobbits, Luzonensis, could muster only hearthside ceremonies, 10 or 12 at most, with the crackle of embers as their lone percussion dot, and yet each species remained a master of its own realm. Neanderthals taught you how to track mammoth across frozen plains, how to craft scrapers that could peel hide in perfect strips, how to read ice flow patterns to predict the mammoth's path. The Denisovans revealed the secrets of glacier springs, the healing properties of alpine herbs you never knew existed. The hobbits showed you how to find shelter in tangled roots and how to fashion nets of vine fibers to trap small game. Luzonensis passed on the art of river navigation, building dugout canoes carved from single logs, perfect for swift currents and shallow pools. These landscapes shaped not only bodies and tools but minds. Neanderthals thought in breath. Where can we find enough meat today? And their world was one of solidity and endurance. You thought in layers. How can we store meat for tomorrow? How can we trade this scraped hide for the promise of new knowledge? Your thoughts stretched forward into seasons, into years, across mountains and plains. The Denisovans thought in heights. How can we survive thinner air? And there, resilience became your mantra when you toyed with crossing high passes. The hobbits thought in intimacy. Where is the smallest source of food? And their close reading of the jungle floor influenced your own foraging techniques. In every place you left traces, a pit dug for roasting tubers, a series of ochre-stained stones marking an apprenticeship site for butchers, a cluster of bone awls left behind like breadcrumbs. And in every place, you observed the others doing the same patterns of survival that would cross-pollinate, morph, and flourish in new contexts. Your generalized curiosity became the greatest adaptation of all over the slow march of generations. These interactions shaped destinies. Your band swelled, your networks entwined. The smaller populations remained constrained, hemmed in by geography and by limited social reach. When climate shifts drained rivers or buried pastures beneath snow, you tapped hidden caches. They perished. When a glacier crept over plains, you followed its edge to new hunting grounds. They were trapped. When volcanoes choked the sky with ash, you migrated along coasts. They dwindled into oblivion. And yet, in every landscape north, east, south, and island, the memory of coexistence lingers. In the patterns of your tools, in the faint genetic echoes that flutter in your blood, in the half-remembered tales whispered around distant hearths. The world you inherited was a tapestry woven from many threads. Each landscape, each species, contributed its own hue. To understand how you came to stand alone, you must remember how you once walked among others, learning, borrowing, out-narrating, and ultimately outlasting them. You've wandered through forests and deserts, across snowdrifts and river floodplains, but no matter the terrain, you carry your toolkit like an extension of your hands and mind. In your sapient world, tools are not mere conveniences. They are statements of identity, of ingenuity, of subtle competition. Imagine lifting an atlot for the first time, a slender shaft of wood balanced in your palm, a groove carved just so, designed to cradle a spear and launch it with twice the force. Of bare arms, you feel the tension in your forearm as you draw back and release and watch as the dart flies truer and harder than any spear you've thrown by hand. In that moment, you sense that this clever lever has shifted the balance in your favor, that you need fewer bodies to fell a mammoth, that fewer mouths go hungry. Nearby, a Neanderthal admires your new toy with wary fascination. Their own hand axes crafted from thick flakes of flint are brute instruments of survival, heavy, reliable, perfect for chopping through sinew and bone. They work in broad, powerful motions, hammering with the inevitability of glaciers. But against the Atlal's elegant arc. Those hand axes seem like club and stone relics, a reminder that raw strength can be outmaneuvered by a lighter touch. Further east, in a Denisovan cave, you come across blades of green jade and gleaming quartz. These are not utilitarian scraps, but delicate knives, their edges worked with microscopic precision. It takes hours, sometimes days, to flake each shard just right, but the result is worth the patience. An instrument that slices through hide and flesh like warm butter, leaving edges so clean that scraps of meat cling to your blade in ribbons, not ragged shreds. You pocket one such fragment, slyly adding their craftsmanship to your own arsenal. On Flores, the diminutive artisans of Homo floresiensis fashion tools that would barely fit Pasapian's hand. Their tiny choppers, scrapers, and awls are marvels of miniature engineering. With them, they fish in narrow streams, gouge burrows for tubers, and carve spindle-like points for tiny arrows. You handle one and realize how much thought went into scaling down every detail, the angle of the bevel, the weight distribution, the grip that rests perfectly in a child's fist. These micro-tools teach you that size is not always strength, that adaptability resides in the smallest of inventions. Luzon's cave dwellers rely on flake kits, a handful of sharp-edged fragments neatly bundled in a leather pouch. When they need a cutting edge, they snap off a fresh flake, use it, then discard it as easily as they would a leaf. There's something intimate about this relationship to tools, a constant cycle of creation and disposal, as if life itself were a series of moments meant to be used, then released. You adopt this habit, wrapping your own flakes in strips of hide, carrying them until they dull, and then dismissing them without ceremony. Closer to home, in your Sapiens gatherings, tools become trophies and teaching aids. You pass around a hand axe admiring its perfect symmetry, while you explain how a beveled edge can slash through sinew at just the right angle. You trade your Atlal for a Denisovan jade blade, demonstrating how the counterweight at its base can reduce arm fatigue. You compare notes on pigment grinding, debating which ochres yield the richest reds, which charcoal smokes the least. In these exchanges, every tool carries a backstory: who found the raw material, how long it took to shape, the ritual you performed before that first test of its edge. Yet tools also bear witness to competition. A larger Sapiens band might appropriate a Neanderthal workshop site, seizing the finest flint nodules for themselves. A Denisovan clan might lock away their jade cache, forbidding outsiders even the sight of their gleaming treasures. On islands, hobbit groups might fiercely defend their micro-tools, knowing that each tiny blade could mean the difference between catch and starvation. Each theft, each secret stash, each awkward negotiation over borrowings tells a story of overlapping lives and diverging ambitions. Over generations, these tools evolve. The atlatl becomes lighter, a notch carved to fit fingers more snugly. The hand axe becomes more refined, its curvature shifting to allow both chopping and butchering. Jade blades grow thinner, their fracture patterns more predictable. Hobbit micro-tools become so fine that they border on artistry, tiny sculptures holding the key to survival. And in your bands, you watch these changes with pride, as if each iteration confirms your species' destiny to innovate, to outthink, to outlast. Every tool also carries the echo of its origin. When you hold that jade blade, you feel the crisp Siberian wind on your face, the echo of a Denisovan whisper guiding your hand. When you heft a hand axe, you sense the Neanderthal's deliberate cadence in your own swing. When you snap a hobbit's microflake, you recognize the pulse of Flores' humid nights in your palm. In this way, tools are not just instruments. They are vessels of memory, carrying the lives of vanished kin into your grasp. In the end, it isn't sheer invention that wins the day, but the ability to borrow, adapt, and diffuse innovations across the widest networks. Your Sapiens tools become a patchwork quilt of cousins' ideas hand axes refined through Atlot-derived angles, jade-honed edges applied to tiny micro-tools, pigments traded and nixed until even firelight glows with borrowed hues. This cultural bricolage stitches disparate traditions into a single tapestry, one that stretches from the ice sheets of Europe to the tangled jungles of Southeast Asia. And when the last of your cousins fade into prehistory, their tools, those flint shards, those polished blades, those miniature awls will lie silent in the soil. Yet their ingenuity lives on in you, in the tools you reshape, in the techniques you teach your children, in the stories you whisper at dawn about the strange, collaborative past that made modern humanity possible. You feel the subtle currents of ideas drifting like pollen on a spring breeze, crossing invisible borders between camps and species. In the hush before dawn, you might hear a flute's distant whine, thin, reedy tones carving the silent air. That flute came from a Neanderthal hand, whittled from hollowed bone and tuned by ear, its melody rising from a small circle of firelight. Farther down the valley, your Sapiens kin adopted its song, weaving it into their own morning chants, unaware that the notes once echoed beneath icy cliffs. Or you might notice the ochre, patterns on a Denisovan's cheek dots and lines arranged, in a sequence that tells of seasonal shifts and celestial alignments. Intrigued, you press a finger to your own face, copying the design with earth-stained fingertips. It feels like borrowing a page from their cosmic calendar, a way to bind your people to the mountain's rhythms. Next season, your own band greets, each hunt with matching symbols, unaware that the pattern's origin traces back to thin-air caves, where Denisovan children once finger-painted their first rites of passage. In the jungle. The hobbits of Flores had a penchant for stringing giant rat teeth into necklaces, each tooth a trophy, each necklace a declaration of survival. You observe this adornment and replicate it, swapping mammoth tusk beads in your own camps. Their island fashion migrates across land bridges and rivers until it appears in camps hundreds of miles away, transformed into something new, a mix of big game tooth and delicate shell, a necklace that sings of both bison hunts and coral reefs, burial. Customs, too, meander through this human network like a slow river. A Neanderthal band in the west first laid a child's body beneath a circle of broken spear points, perhaps an act of fierce protection for the journey ahead. Word drifts eastward, carried by traders and wanderers. Your people, moved by the rituals, defiance of death, begin to plant simple grave goods, flint arrowheads, pieces of red ochre beside their own dead. It becomes a rite of passage, a way to honor loss and bind the community in shared grief. Even the stories themselves take new shapes. You tell of a trickster who outwits a woolly rhinoceros by mimicking its call. They tell of a spirit bear whose footprints guide lost hunters home. Over time, the two tailies merge in borderlands, creating a new legend of a ghostly elk that grants visions to those brave enough to follow its spoor. No one species can claim sole authorship. The legend belongs to all who have whispered it around. Their fires. Language absorbs these cross-cultural currents. You borrow a Denisovan word for ice that captures the feeling of wind slicing through bone more precisely than any Sapiens term. They adopt your pronoun, we, when referring to a coalition of mixed bands, finding it useful to distinguish insiders from outsiders. Neanderthals pick up the concept of story from Sapiens, grunting a term that roughly translates to song of words, allowing them to convey more than the immediate hunt or the immediate danger. Each borrowed term carves a small passage between minds, channels of understanding that widen with every repeated use. Patterns of body decoration wander too. You see a Luzonensis symbol, an interlaced spiral in a distant cave painting. Curious, you replicate its curves on your own shields, believing the design to invoke the protective power of the cave. Generations later, archaeologists will puzzle. over the spiral's origin, attributing it to sapiens' ingenuity, unaware that it first spiraled from the fingertips of slender island hands. Music travels. Flutes, drums, clapping rhythms. These intangible tools cross species lines with ease. No blade could match. A melody born in a Neanderthal cave beneath a glacial cliff becomes part of the sapiens' courtship dance by a tropical lagoon. You learn to drum on hollow logs, imitating the throaty resonance of Neanderthal bone drums. In turn, they pick up your rattle small gourds filled with pebbles and shake them in time with the flute, creating hybrid ensembles that blur the lines between us and them. All this cross-pollination happens without grand summits or formal treaties. There are no embassies carved of stone, no parchment scrolls detailing diplomatic terms. Instead, it is an endless sequence of small gestures. The shared song, the adopted. Pigment, the retold legend, the imitated tool. Each exchange feels innocuous, even trivial, yet across centuries it weaves a web, so tight that the notion of a purely separate species becomes increasingly absurd. Yet the process is uneven and capricious. Some ideas take root, others wither. A particularly haunting Neanderthal lullaby might vanish after a couple of generations, its melody lost when a man migrates beyond hearing range. A Denisovan knotting technique might be adopted for leather, thong production, but never for basket weaving, because their society never wove baskets. The Hobbit's miniature arrowheads may inspire experimental microtools among your people, only to be abandoned when larger game returns to the region. These ebbs and flows leave archaeological fingerprints, a flake of jade far from its quarry, a cave painting style that inexplicably mirrors a distant mountain tradition, a linguistic root that refuses to appear in written form, but survives in the shape of a local idiom. Centuries later, scholars will trace these anomalies as evidence of prehistoric globalization, even though the participants themselves likely saw nothing momentous in gifting a bead or mimicking a melody. Through this dynamic interplay, you unwittingly perform a colossal experiment in cultural ecology. You test which ideas thrive, which perish, and which hybridize into something entirely new. It is a process both tender and ruthless, tender in its curiosity, ruthless in its capacity to swallow. One tradition into another's unfolding narrative. The hapless Neanderthal storyteller, for instance, might see his tale absorbed into a sapiens epic and recast with new heroes and landscapes, losing its original context, but gaining a new lease on life. By the time only one human species remains. The legacy of these cross-cultural currents is embedded in every corner of the surviving culture. Your songs carry echoes of Neanderthal flutes. Your myths contain asides drawn from Denisovan cosmology. Your burial rites bear the imprint of foreign spear point circles. And your very hands, when shaping flint, remember the angles first taught. By hobbit-sized grips and island flake dash kits. In that sense, no species ever truly vanished. They live on in the rhythms of your drum, the curve of your spiral, the edges of your blade, and the stories you whisper to the flickering firelight. Cultural cross-pollination becomes your immortality, a reminder that humanity's strength lies not in purity, but in the messy brilliance of shared creativity. Remember that as you drift to sleep under tonight's stars, some of which may have gazed down on the first human collaborations, knowing that even in extinction, your cousins helped shape the world you now call home. You watch the seasons turn, again and again, spring's tentative green unfurling into summer's ride of growth, summer yielding to autumn's crimson hush, and that hush slipping into the white stillness of winter. In each cycle, the world changes shape. Rivers swell and shrink, forests march and recoil, ice sheets gnaw at the edges of the land. And with every shift, you sense the margins of your shared world contracting, as though some unseen hand is slowly erasing lines in the sand. Once, the earth was a patchwork of human voices. Now, those voices grow faint. You see it first in the north, where Neanderthal campsites, once laden with pitched spears and thick pelts, lie empty beneath drifts of snow. The footprints in the frozen mud, once crisp and bold, blur into ghostly smudges that vanish in a few hours of thaw. Where you once traded fish for flint, you now find only scattered chips of stone and the occasional half-buried hearthstone. The bands that carved those sites were few to begin with, and each harsh winter claims more of their numbers. Their resilience, honed over countless ice ages, succumbs to cycles so extreme that no story or ritual can bind them to survival. Farther east, you notice Denisovan silhouettes on the high ridges becoming rarer. Their camps, built beneath wind-swept outcrops, go unlit. The gleaming jade blades you once coveted gather dust in your stores, trophies of exchanges that are now memories. Those who mastered life in thin air find even foothills unforgiving when glaciers advance. With each encroaching ice tongue, their territories shrink until there is nowhere left to turn. What remains is a library of broken tools and silent caves, their inhabitants gone on a journey from which none return. On Flores, the hobbits' lore about river spirits and jungle guardians grows silent. The delicate micro-tools they crafted tools, so refined you could almost admire them as art, are left abandoned in the undergrowth. Fires once tended beneath the fern fronds, embers glowing like sleepy fireflies, now flicker no more. Island isolation, once their shield, becomes their prison. When a sudden drought parches the streams or a volcanic tremor rattles the understory, there are too few hands to rebuild. Entire lineages vanish like pebbles slipping beneath the tide, leaving only the whisper of a vanished heartbeat in the leaves. And in the limestone caverns of Luzon, those slender cave dwellers whose artful handprints once decorated every wall become legends of absence. The handprints grow sparse. The silent echoes of tiny footsteps fade until the caves themselves feel abandoned. Their delicate methods of gathering clams and nuts falter when storms wash away foraging grounds, and without a broad network to warn of shifting resources, they vanish into the mists of prehistory dot across all these lands. You observe the same pattern: small, specialized populations, exquisitely adapted to narrow niches, fading when the earth's rhythm step just a fraction faster than they can follow. Meanwhile, your own bands endure. You have the luxury of generalism. You chase seasonal patterns. You barter grain and bone tools across hundreds of miles. You shift your camps with the ebb and flow of game and weather. You tap into sprawling kinship networks that span forests, mountains, and coasts' vast webs of trust that buffer you against local disaster. Still, there are no triumphant banners raised at the disappearance of your cousins. No trumpets herald the final Neanderthal hunt or the last Denisovan blade napped at dawn. Instead, there is an ache in your chest, a hollow silence where once the world thrummed with diverse song. You feel responsible, though you never set out to supplant them. You only sought survival, and through language, ritual, myth, and barter, your species wove a tapestry so broad that others, lovely and irreplaceable threads, unraveled at the edges dot in quieter moments you imagine standing at the rim of a vast, empty plain at sunset. The wind carries no voices now, only the distant howl of wolves and the mournful creak of dying trees. You search the horizon for smoke that will never appear, for footprints that have faded beyond memory. You recall the first meeting, the shared fish and flint, the interwoven laughter and fear. You remember the hollow warmth of a borrowed flame, the way firelight softened faces of others who looked so much like you. And you realize that those meetings, those sparks, were not mere curiosities, but fragile fulcrums, balancing the fate of species. Yet still you press on. You build larger camps, carve deeper trails through forests, cross straits on rafts that grow sturdier with each iteration. You teach your children to hunt, to tell tales, to bind their silence with song. You console one another when the herds scatter. You ration stores when winter bites. You sing hymns to the sky spirits to coax the seasons forward. In doing so, you carry a dual legacy, the triumph of your narrative networks and the quiet sorrow of lost kin. The earth shifts again. A river changes course, carving a new channel in the plains. For you, it is an opportunity, fertile banks to farm, fresh fishing grounds to claim. For those whose numbers have dwindled, it is an upheaval too great to endure. Their hearths, once fixed beside the old channel, grow cold as they watch the water slip away at each turning of the wheel, each drought, each plague of insects, each ice advance. You lean on your alliances. A messenger rides through the night to bid a neighboring band share its grain. A shaman's song echoes in multiple camps, a hymn to the rain that summons gentle showers. Your myths morph with each telling, absorbing lessons of caution, hope, and renewal. In your world, stories are lifeline strands extended across valleys, binding you to survival. And so the slow disappearance continues, marked not by blood red sunset battles, but by the fading of hearth fires and the loss of small rituals. Bands of others drift from the world, leaving behind only broken flakes of stone and the faintest genetic echoes in your own blood. The world becomes quieter, emptier, until at last you walk it alone. In that solitude, you carry their absence like a stone in your pocket, heavy, unspoken. You press your hand to your chest at night, feeling the rhythm of a heart that once beat in many forms. You whisper their names around your fires, even if no one listening recognizes the tongues in which they were first spoken. You paint symbols on cave walls, spirals, handprints, fluted birds that echo shapes they once painted first. In these gestures, you honor them, even as your species claims dominion. This is the story of disappearance unhurried, uncelebrated, almost invisible in the grand sweep of time. It is a testament to the subtle power of networks and narratives, and a reminder that survival can feel like loss. You stand in the hush of a world emptied of voices, and you realize that being the last of your kind is both a gift and a burden, a lonely inheritance written in stone, echoing in bone and carried forever in the fragile weave of memory. Centuries pass, and yet the whispers of those vanished kin persist, not in hearth smoke or bone fragments, but in the half-forgotten tales that drift between your people like leaves on a slow stream. A trickster spirit who outwits great beasts, once told around Neanderthal fires, reappears in your camp by the river as a cunning fox weaving tales beneath a pale moon. You don't know its origin, only that every time you tell the story, you feel the pulse of an older voice behind your own words, a timbre long hushed by winter's bite and summer's blaze. You speak of a giant elk whose antlers scrape the sky, leading lost wanderers home. In another valley, the story morphs. The creature speaks in harsh grunts, its eyes glowing with embers. That version comes from Denisovan mouths, high in the mountains. Somewhere between the two, you and your kin stitch together a hybrid legend. An elk spirit whose antlers cradle the sky's edge, whose breath becomes the wind that guides hunters through fog-shrouded forests. No one remembers who first painted its antlered silhouette on cave walls, but every child listens with rapt attention, learning its name, even if none can trace that name back to its original language. Burial rites offer another thread of memory. You place red ochre at the head of the deceased, a practice borrowed from a Neanderthal band famed for their ceremonial care of the dead. In distant islands, hobbit groups entwine tiny shells into necklaces laid with their departed. In your resting places, you now include both ochre and shell, a gesture of respect that feels as natural as breathing. though the meaning has blurred with each retelling. Those shells were never native to your lands. They came in trade pouches from jungles you never tread. And yet, when you press one to your lips in mourning, you feel closer to the vanished hands that first threaded it through SINEW.music too. Carries these echoes. A rhythmic drumbeat, once pounded in Denisovan caves, a cadence meant to mimic avalanches crashing down icy slopes. That pattern resurfaces in your own winter solstice celebrations, when you stamp your feet against hardened earth and beat antler drums in time, seeking the same thundering connection to the world's pulse. You may not know the story behind the drum's origin, but the rhythm deepens your heartbeat, synchronizing your tribe beneath the frozen stars. Even the names of animals bear the imprint of lost tongues. The word you use for bear is a mangled echo of a Neanderthal root, originally a guttural roar meant to command respect, later softened on sapiens' tongues until it becomes a gentle term, almost affectionate, for a creature you both feared and revered. In eastern valleys, the term for mountain goat derives from a Denisovan word whose precise meaning has slipped into ambiguity. You chant it in low tones when you scale rocky ledges, invoking the same reverence those high-altitude cousins. Once felt patterns of body paint drift across your people in curious ways. A spiral motif first, etched by Luzon cave dwellers in ritual homage to the moon, reappears centuries later on your own shields, believed to grant protection in battle. No one recalls that the spiral was originally a shorthand for tidal movements, a vital pattern for island foragers. Instead, the shape has become a symbol of eternity, a silent nod to ancestors whose names were lost, but whose designs still speak. Over time, these borrowed myths and customs become inseparable from your own traditions. You build new stories atop the old, layering meaning until the original source is all but invisible. Yet, in your quietest moments, when wind rustles through grass and stars wheel overhead, you sense something ancient stirring beneath your words, a memory that predates your own language, a chorus of vanished voices echoing in the spaces between syllables. Archaeologists of the distant future will puzzle over anomalies in your stories. Why a fox trickster appears where no fox ever roamed. Why shell necklaces show up in regions devoid of seas. Why drone rhythms mimic patterns of ice that melted millennia ago. They will trace these clues in museum catalogs and carbon-dated shards, weaving hypotheses about cultural migration. But for you, the resonance needs no explanation. Each story, each ritual, each borrowed beat is a testament to silent collaborations. Across epics. In the end, myth becomes more than entertainment or moral lesson. It becomes the living archive of lost lives. You speak the names of long-gone kin when you whisper of spirits in hollow trees, when you offer the first catch of the season to mountain gods, when you paint handprints in hidden caves. Those echoes in myth and memory remind you that disappearance is never absolute. Even as flesh and bone return to dust, their voices survive in the narratives you pass from one generation to the next, faint, distorted, yet undeniably theirs. And so the tapestry of your culture remains rich with threads you did not spin alone. Strands of Neanderthal firelight, Denisovan windsong, Hobbit Island whispers, Luzon cave murmurs. These are myths born of many minds, woven into the story you tell by your own flickering flame. As you drift into sleep beneath the night sky, take comfort in knowing that these echoes bind you to a chorus far larger than yourself. Ancient kin whose last voices still hum softly in the endless expanses of memory. The centuries that follow bring more than silence. They bring reflection, invention, and a new kind of myth, the story of the lone survivor, the last human standing. In the wake of vanished kin, you begin to speak of yourself as unique, the sole author of history's next volume. You build monument stone circles, earthen mounds, to celebrate your supremacy over beasts and cold alike. You paint grand scenes of triumph, a sapiens warrior standing atop a fallen mammoth, a single torch held aloft against a night of countless enemies. Yet even as you erect these symbols, a subtle guilt seeps into your celebrations. You feel it, as a tremor beneath the feast's laughter, a pinprick in the marrow when you carve triumphal scenes into bone. Without realizing it, you begin to ask awkward questions at the edges of your songs. Was it destiny that others fated? Or did you simply tell better stories? Did your network of myths and alliances charm the seasons to your side? Or did it shove your cousins into oblivion by accident? The lone survivor myth ripples beneath every banquet, half drowned by toasts to future generations. Only one remains. You murmur at midnight when the crowd has left the fire embers cold. And that one is us. The words taste hollow. They echo off empty stone chambers where once children of many species laughed together. Your own story feels too tidy now, pared down by absence. You sense that survival is never solely victory. It is also loss, a ledger balanced by empty spaces as much as triumphant records dot in the centuries to come. Your people will look back on this era and call themselves exceptional. They will claim mastery of land and sea, of sky and mind. Yet for those who listen closely, the ancestral hum persists, a low chorus woven from myriad voices. It lives on in the hidden codes of your DNA, a handful of Neanderthal alleles that guide your immune system, tiny Denisovan snippets that help your lungs expand at altitude, perhaps even traces of a hobbit-derived metabolism attuned to scarce resources. These genetic echoes remind you that you never truly stood alone. Your body is a mosaic, a living archive of vanished cousins dot as centuries stretch into millennia. The memory of these extinct humans becomes both legend and dust. Scholars debate their classifications. Were Neanderthals a separate species, or mere subspecies? Even as their bones lie in museum drawers, catalogued by numbers rather than names. Tourists gaze at glass cases filled with ancient skulls, peering through captions that read like footnotes to your grand narrative. Few pause to ask what those skulls once meant. The child who laughed in a snowy cave, the grandmother who hummed a lullaby to comfort a shivering child, the artisan whose jade-sharp blade bore the mark of a wind-whipped plateau dot in libraries. Dusty tomes reconstruct scenes of the Ice Age, but they are framed entirely from your perspective. You write histories of Homo sapiens, of cities and calendars, and conquests, while the stories of Denisovans, hobbits, and Lazanensis recede into appendices. The narrative narrows until it culminates in your techno-miracles, steel forging, irrigation canals, written laws. Yet beneath every iron plow and every parchment scroll lies a tacit debt to vanished ingenuity. Without the subtle exchanges of our prehistoric era, to borrow a flute melody here, a burial rite there, your triumphs would stand on a far slimmer foundation dot and in the quiet of modern labs. Beneath fluorescent lights, researchers extract ancient DNA from fossil fragments. They sequence genomes, mapping out the intertwined branches of our family tree. Each genetic marker reveals a tale, an interbreeding event 50 millennia past, a Denisovan variant that allowed early Tibetans to settle high plateaus, a hobbit inherited, gene linked to efficient fat storage. These discoveries become headlines. Neanderthal genes protect against virus X, yet the deeper story remains unspoken, that our very definitions of health, adaptation, and human potential are shaped by cousins we thought lost. Meanwhile, outside those labs, people live their lives unaware of the silent guests in their cells. They complain of high-altitude sickness, of immune disorders, of metabolism quirks, never realizing that a fraction of their biology was borrowed from a people who once sang under glacial stars. Those ancient voices persist in every heartbeat, every breath, every shiver in cold air. They are part of what you are, threading through the faint patterns of your posture and the echo of your footsteps. Perhaps the greatest irony is that, in celebrating your solitude, your status as the soul, human species, you honor their legacy most profoundly. Every story you tell, every life you save with a tool refined over millennia, every border you cross with a raft you perfected through cultural cross-pollination, carries forward a fragment of vanished creativity. Your art, your myth, your rituals remain vibrant only because they grew atop a fertile bed of shared invention. At night, when the moonlight silvers the plains, you might catch yourself whispering half-remembered words from an extinct tongue. You hum a melody born in a Denisovan cave, or hum a pattern first tapped out by Neanderthal knuckles. You trace spirals on fresh clay, unconsciously echoing the Luzonensis handprints that once adorned limestone walls. In these fleeting moments, the past and present converge, dissolving the illusion of human exceptionalism into a richer tapestry of kinship. As you drift into sleep under tonight's sky, beneath stars unchanged since the Pleistocene, you become both storyteller and story. You carry within you the triumphs and sorrows of a family far larger than Homo sapiens alone. And in that realization lies a final, haunting comfort. Extinction may erase bodies and scatter bones, but it cannot erase echoes. Those echoes endure. In genes and in gestures, in myths and in music, in every tool and every ritual you cherish. In the end, being the last of your kind is neither a crown nor a curse, but a complex inheritance, a responsibility to remember what once was, a challenge, to honor that legacy in how you live, and a promise that no disappearance is ever truly final. For the voices of Neanderthals, Denisovans, hobbits, and Luzonensis will always reside in the hush between your words, the rhythm of your heartbeat, and the stories you whisper to the dark. In that boundless chorus, you discover your truest kin, and in that knowledge, you are never alone. If you've made it this far and still happen to be awake, well, congratulations. You've just wandered through tens of thousands of years of extinction, interbreeding, myth-making, and quiet genetic borrowing, all without needing to light a single fire or dodge a hungry cave lion. And if you're drifting off, that's fine too. After all, what better way to fall asleep than with the gentle knowledge that you're the last human standing, at least for now, and that inside you is a ghostly cocktail of long-lost cousins, all humming along in your DNA like background music you didn't know you were dancing to. Remember, we didn't just outsurvive the others. We absorbed them. We inherited their quirks, their strengths, their mysteries. The fact that you exist at all is a patchwork miracle stitched together by chance, climate shifts, and a few awkward prehistoric hookups. So tonight, as you lie in the dark and feel very modern in your temperature-controlled cave, think of those who came before, not just your sapiens ancestors, but the ones with brow ridges, tiny statures, and strange toolkits we're still figuring out. Think of the whispers in your genes, the ones who never got to write their story. In some small, stubborn way, you're writing it for them. Sleep well, traveler of deep time. We'll meet again, somewhere between a mammoth shadow and the flicker of torchlight on cave walls. Until then, stay curious, and maybe a little grateful that the only species of human you have to compete with now is the one that keeps double parking at the grocery store. Good night.